Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. Thank you for attending this session, even though there's two pretty cool other interesting sessions going on. All right, so the topic for today's talk is going to be on long-termism, AI, and animals. And as the host introduced, I work at Animal Ethics on creating awareness about these topics that are quite important, but are frequently overlooked by us as animal advocates. So my goal at this talk is to share information about what long-termism is. I'm assuming most of you are aware. If not, I will share a bit about that. And then I'll also talk about this intersection of how transformative AI will have an impact on animals and what we as animal advocates can do and how we can strategize to be prepared for what's about to happen once transformative AI radically changes society. But before I go ahead, I would like to get a sense check of how many people here are aware of transformative AI. If you are, like, have you heard about AGI and transformative AI? If so, please raise your hands. Okay. And how many of you have heard about long-termism? Okay. So I think it might still be useful for me to give like a brief overview of both these concepts as I go ahead. All right. So here's a thought experiment. So when I talk about long-termism, people don't really get what I mean by it. So I would like to request you to take the position of a person who is like a nuclear policy expert or something. And you have to decide whether, so you run a nuclear power plant and there's a lot of nuclear waste that's left over. And now you need to decide if you want to put this waste in this sophisticated, expensive enclosure deep underground, which would take a lot of money, and that money could be used for, I don't know, development, etc. Or you can just store that nuclear waste somewhere in the fields, which is much less expensive. But the downside of that would be that the sentient beings, animals and humans, will be affected over the course. As the nuclear waste degenerates more and more, it will release out a lot of harmful radiation, and it will continue affecting animals 100 years, 500 years, 10,000 years down the line. So all these sentient beings that will exist into the future will be affected because of your decision to put them in the fields. But however, that is way less expensive than digging this kilometers deep bore well and building this sophisticated enclosure to store it in there, which would be much more robust. So I would just like to ask you, how many of you would be in favor of storing it in the fields? Great. So we do care about the interests of animals that will come into existence in the future, whether it's animals or humans. And we would, even if it's expensive, want to change the trajectory of the long-term future in a way where it's causing less harm and is more beneficial for the people out there. So this is the foundational crux of this concept or philosophy called as long-termism, which is, it's also similar with climate change, for example. Like, the impacts of climate change will be felt by our successive generations. But we do care about the interests of the future beings that will come into existence. However, the society as a whole tends to fall to this near-termist bias, which is it tends to give more weight to near-term consequences. And because of all of this additional complexity where you feel like you don't know about what will happen in the future, people just tend to focus on near-term issues. For example, let's go back into 1900s, before factory farming was in existence. The activists of that day were focusing on things like things that were prevalent at that time. For example, that would be anti-vivisection, because dogs were cut open and they were like, without anesthesia, they were experimented on for whatever purposes. And around the same time, around 1920s, is when vitamin D became more prevalent, production of vitamin D, and the farmers started using vitamin D for farmed animals, which allowed them to breed the farmed animals indoors without access to sunlight. At the same time, there was pesticides, which allowed for crops to be grown en masse that could be fed to the farmed animals, which allowed them to scale up the production of farmed animals. There was antibiotics. So when you put a lot of animals indoors without sunlight and feed them a lot of pesticide-laden crops, you get a lot of diseases. And there was also the production of antibiotics, which also facilitated the introduction of factory farming. And this was all happening around the time of Industrial Revolution, where humans had a tendency to kind of industrialize most existing production methods. And the activists of that day were oblivious to what was happening. But however, one could argue that they might have had more leverage to how factory farming progressed. If activists of that day had foreseen that industrial revolution can also encompass animals and will also start affecting them, perhaps they might have changed the trajectory of what we see today, where we have factory farms with billions of animals, and factory farming as an institution is entrenched into society. So that's the argument here, which is future animals matter, future sentient beings matter. And one can argue that there'd be many more sentient beings in the far future than today. Like, it's estimated that today, like, there's 10 to the power 13, like 10 to the power 8, like 10 billion humans. And then there are 10 to the power 13 farmed animals. And if you include wild animals, there's many more, let's say 10 to the power 19. And this is a very uncertain number. And humans say in the next 100 years, we will have a lifespan of, let's say, 100 years, so our population will more or less increase relatively slowly. Whereas for animals that give birth very fast and die very fast, in the next 100 years, the number of animals that will come into existence would be much larger. So the number of animals in the far future would be far larger than the number of animals that exist today or in the near future. Future animals matter, like we agreed. It's unjustified to discriminate against beings based on when they are born, just as we would feel it is unjustified to discriminate against animals based on where they are born. So that's one. And the second premise is that we can affect the trajectory of the far future. Like, one could argue that maybe there might have been some levers that the activists of 1920s or 1910s could have used to change the trajectory of factory farming. Invention of wheel, all the tools developed during industrial revolution, invention of computer, internet, and AI more recently is changing the trajectory of our future. And the premise here is that we can affect the future. We can affect the future for future sentient beings. However, there are people who dispute this. There have been posts coming out where they talk about, oh, we cannot really affect the future. We don't know how future will go. There's a lot of complexity. And there's an additional objection that has recently come up, which is TAI timelines. So for those of you who are not very aware about transformative AI, so AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, stands for an AI that has the capacity to do almost everything that a functional human can do in terms of problem solving or creativity, etc. And transformative AI is, with these capacities that an AGI has, the kind of radical transformation it would bring about in the society, whether it's in terms, like how industrial revolution basically did to our society currently, whether it's in terms of economy, politics, medicine, research, etc. So there's a growing consensus that the timelines for the existence of transformative AI, or like the invention of transformative AI, is pretty soon. It's estimated to be in the next, some say in the next 10 years, some say in the next 20 years, or some say in the next 5 years. So the timelines have shrunk a lot. Initially, it was around 2100, and now it has shrunk to the next 10 to 20 years. So the amount of compute, like effective training compute, as they say it, which is the amount of resources going into building transformative AI, is rapidly accelerating. And how would this affect animal advocates? It would affect the situation of animals in the society. So yeah, that's regarding the shorter TI timelines, which is that with shorter timelines, it would mean that the society radically changes, which would also mean that the situation of animals in the society also changes. And they argue that once TAI comes about, the paradigm of the society would change so significantly that we would not know what consequences would it have on animals. So no matter what we do right now, we can't really affect the situation of animals once this AI comes into picture and changes the society so radically. It's possible that cage-free campaigns no longer matter, because maybe once an AI comes into the picture, it might incentivize keeping hens into these small battery cages because it is more easy to monitor. So essentially, these are the two objections which one could together combine and say that, oh, long-termism doesn't really work because we can't really affect the future. Transformative AI would change everything so significantly, and we can't really do much about it. And this takes different flavors. One is, it is through radical pessimism, which is by saying, oh, once the AI comes in, maybe it'll destroy the society. So this is a common prediction, which is that it might be very hard to align the values of this AGI or the super intelligence with the values of humans, and it might end up taking over society. It's called takeover. Or it's possible that some dictator takes over this AI system and runs like a large coup. And so the animals are going to doom anyway. And the next is radical optimism, which is that, oh, once transformative AI comes about, it'll be very wise, it'll understand all morals, and maybe alternative protein would scale up very rapidly, and all the problems that we are currently facing will be solved. And the other is total uncertainty, which is people argue, no matter what, we will not know what will happen in the future, and we can't really affect it at all. So they take these three flavors, and what it would imply is, one, whatever, let's do whatever we want right now. Like, we're doing what we're doing, let's continue with that. We don't really need to care about this. Let's put our head in the sand. Or one could take this other belief, which is called as near-termism, which is the idea that I will not care about the long-term future, I will only care about the near future, the next 10 years. And I will only focus on the consequences of whatever intervention we are doing, whether it's cage-free campaigns, plant-based campaigns, etc., on the next 10 years. And we will not care about the long-term future. So one would take these two things. But I would argue that is not necessarily the best option. One, because does futility argument hold up? Futility is this idea that we can't do anything. So I would say there's not total uncertainty. I would argue there's moderate uncertainty. So we know that there are some things that are more likely than others, which means that there's not total uncertainty. For example, during the Industrial Revolution, or Scientific Revolution, sorry, there was also this belief that, oh, everything is unpredictable, we can't really do much. But the scientists actually did notice some common patterns which they found to be existing into the future, which is the movement of the planets, or like how certain like physical systems interact, etc. So they were able to build out likelihoods of different systems, and trying to build out what is more likely, what is less likely. So it can be argued that while there is high uncertainty, we know that some interventions lead to systematically positive outcomes as compared to other interventions. We cannot perhaps estimate exactly how much, but it's likely that some interventions will, and I will outline more of that in the next few slides. And the next thing is, one could argue through radical optimism that, oh, AI will completely eliminate the need to factory farm animals. However, most people in the society and scientists and people who are developing AI don't really care about wild animal suffering. How many of you are aware of wild animal suffering? Okay, great, most of you, thank you. So yeah, like, it means that the society as a whole would not really care about this, and the AI systems that will be developed will not necessarily take into consideration the interests of animals living in the wild. So that's another thing that will not be solved, which is wild animal suffering. So there are things that we can do using transformative AI that would lead to better outcomes for wild animal suffering, because the status quo is absolutely worse. If we reject the futility argument, how do we go about it? We could take the weak near-termism argument, which is that I will work on the near term, but at the same time, I will consider the long-term consequences of my intervention. I will take into consideration how future circumstances will affect the robustness of this intervention. And the next thing is, you can still say, I'm not convinced by the futility argument. I still think the long-term consequences matter, and I'm still going to engage in understanding what are the long-term consequences of a given intervention and how we can change the situation for animals in the future. So if you take that, I will outline two small approaches, like broad approach and targeted approach. If you've seen my other talks, you will notice I always try to categorize it into these two categories. And I'll now give a few examples in each category. But first, if you accept the weak near-termism argument, what could you do? If your belief in the timelines based on the rate at which AI capabilities are progressing, if you believe that it'll come in the next 3 years, like a lot of very popular figures in the AI space have predicted, which is like by 2027 or 2028, you could perhaps focus on working on farmed animals, because we already have strategies that are robust and which we know work. So it makes more sense to focus on farmed animals. However, if you decide to focus, if you decide that perhaps the timelines are a little longer, it might come about by 2038. In that case, it might make more sense to focus on wild animals. Why? Because, like I mentioned, the AI capabilities are increasing quite rapidly, and like how this happens is, so AI does research on its own capabilities, and there's a self-perpetuating cycle of its capabilities increasing. So its research capabilities would increase significantly. Its manufacturing capabilities would increase significantly, which would make it possible for us to get a lot more information about the lives of animals in the wild and also how we can help them. Right now, if I want to help animals in the wild, most people would say, oh, we don't know the relationship of different wild animals. Maybe I help this wild animal, it affects this wild animal, etc. But with growing capabilities in AI, it might make it possible for us to understand these dynamics more carefully. And it might also make it easier for us to implement interventions out there in the wild. So focusing either on farmed or wild have different long-term effects. While it might be safer to work on farmed animals, it need not be higher in expected value. Whereas working on wild animals might lead to higher expected value because they are more in number, and as I mentioned, the status quo is that wild animals are not considered at all, whereas farmed animals are considered a bit. So yeah, that's one thing that you could do if you work on near-termism. And then talking about what if you take a long-termist approach, how could you go ahead? Working on social norms, changing social norms. So a lot of people have argued that, oh, by just injecting pro-animal values into AI, perhaps we can change the way AI treats animals. But it's not going to be that easy. So there's something called as emergent values, which is that even if you inject those values into AI, if the broader society doesn't care about animals at all, then it is possible that, yeah, the AI might still end up caring about what the broader society cares about. And some people have talked about including animals in the constitution, but that in itself might not be sufficient because not all LLMs that are out there or AGIs that might exist will not have a constitution necessarily. And so it is very important to change the social norms to get them to care about all sentient beings. So that might also include changing our priorities from focusing on behavior change, which is making people go vegan, to getting people to think about anti-speciesism, changing their attitudes, so that the future society holds values, like how they hold anti-racism currently, they might also come about to hold anti-speciesism in the same regard. And so when I talked about there are some interventions that are more likely to lead to positive outcomes. One example is changing the social norms and building about institutions that lead to, in some way, ensuring that these social norms persist into the future, like laws or other governance bodies, etc. And having positive social norms is positive in almost all scenarios. It's hard to argue that arguing for anti-speciesism will lead to negative scenarios in the far future. Whereas one could argue that focusing on behavior change, let's say like veganism or something like that. I mean, I'm not saying that veganism should not be argued for, don't get me wrong. But focusing exclusively on behavior change might not be robust into the far future once AI changes the society completely. So that's my main point, basically. And the next is AI and animals outreach. So far, it's an emerging field. There are very few organizations focusing on this, very few papers on this, and there's not a lot of thought going into how transformative AI will affect animals. On the other hand, the animal agriculture industry is already thinking about this quite a lot. There's a lot of investment going into precision livestock farming, etc. And also, if we want to change these institutions to be positive for the animals, it's not going to be instant. So we need to start working on it right now. Because like there was a wargaming session that happened a couple days ago, and we noticed how quickly things will happen, but at the same time, to change the institutions and to change the incentives that the industry has or the governments have, it'll take a lot of time. So we need to get more brains to think about how transformative AI will affect animals and what can we do about it. And third, we need to have adaptive capacities as organizations and advocates. It's important that we leave some space to think about the risks that this AI development will have for our organizations or our interventions or our campaign plans. it's important to not be very rigid in our approach and to have like slightly flexible, adaptive approach that as AI capabilities increase, we also start to pivot as is necessary to have impact. So flexible focus. But these are just examples like that I gave for broad approaches. So broader approaches are more robust, and however, one could argue that they are less impactful compared to like more targeted approaches. So there's a lot more research that can be done in trying to identify broader, more robust approaches to have long-term effects for animals. And as opposed to this is the targeted approaches. So some people have argued, I just want to get a sense check again. How many of you think that in the next 100 years there's a possibility of there being sentient AI? Okay, 60-40. Great, so a lot of thoughtful people have argued that it's possible that in the next 100 years, we might have computational systems that might have the capacity to have subjective experiences. And some have also argued that because it's so cheap to produce these systems, they might be much larger in number compared to biological beings. So some people have argued that because we as animal advocates care about sentient beings, given that AI might also be sentient in the future, it makes sense to shift to AI welfare. And given that now we have like the AI systems have not come about already, the sentient AI systems, so we can create governance systems, we can create benchmarks, we can create like safeguards to ensure that once the sentient AI comes about, they don't go through a lot of harm, or they're not exploited. And the other thing is that it also overlaps with speciesism, because we as animal advocates, we have an understanding of how speciesism develops. Like, we notice how we extend moral consideration to some beings and not to others. So this understanding of how this overlaps might be interesting, because that might also spill over to substratism, which is the idea that only biological sentient beings deserve moral consideration, and not sentient beings from other substrates. So there's an opportunity to understand how does AI welfare and animal advocacy overlap. And the second thing is influencing the AI development right now. While I have presented some objections against solely focusing on having pro-animal values in AI, I still think that's a very impactful approach. However, this needs to be done very carefully so as to not be very controversial and alienate folks who are working on AI development from animal advocacy. It's very important to take a very strategic and collaborative approach with folks who are developing AI. It could also be that more animal advocates move to San Francisco, where a lot of these AI labs are, and try to interact with people from there. Because in the future, if things are very bad, if we have allies within the AI development space, it might be very useful in influencing how that affects non-human animals. And apart from that, there's field-specific risks, like folks have already talked about, using AI in factory farming, or whether it's research. However, one needs to be careful that one could think that, using AI in factory farming might mean that animals are less prone to diseases or harms that they go through right now in like concentrated factory farming operations. However, by using PLF, it might be possible that we make it much more efficient to farm animals, so there might be much more animals in existence than that exists today. And so it might just make the whole factory farming much more efficient, which might cause more factory farms to exist. And this is in contrast to people thinking that, AI will only aid alternative protein development. So I'm just trying to present like a contrast between AI on one hand accelerating all protein development, but at the same time also making factory farming more efficient. And the second thing is research. Some people might argue that through the use of AI, we might no longer need animals in testing, but at the same time, AI might also accelerate creating genetically modified organisms for specific purposes, which might also lead to different forms of considerations where animals are harmed, etc. And there are unknowns. So what I am saying right now is from like some brainstorming and also taking into account what's already been published in the literature on some EA forum posts, etc. But there's a lot more work and a lot more nuances that I'm probably missing out on. And we definitely need to keep our eyes open for black swan events where, animals are harmed in ways where we don't expect. How much time do I have? A lot. OK, great. going quickly into wild animals on Earth. Sorry, missing a slide there. But anyway, so there's two forms of species, basically. Like if you look at how they adapt to the environment, one is a generalist species that thrive in most environments, and they don't require very specific niche to survive. And the way they reproduce is by giving birth to huge number of offsprings, out of which very few end up surviving. As opposed to this, they are specialist species that probably survive in very niche ecosystems, and they give birth to fewer offsprings on average, and tend to have better lives. So with growing climate change, it's possible that the environments might change, or like the ecosystems might change rapidly, which would lead to a more generalist boom, which is more animals that reproduce in ways where they give birth to huge number of offsprings, out of which very few end up surviving. So the net welfare in ecosystems would decrease. And as I mentioned, they have faster life histories, which is they don't live for very long, they keep reproducing, and most of them end up dying. One example of this species is, like, for example, salmon, that gives birth to 20,000 offsprings on average, and out of which less than 2% end up surviving into adulthood. So there might be more of these beings in the future as climate change accelerates, which might mean that there might be more suffering in the wild as well. That said, these numbers are very uncertain. I don't know if the suffering would increase or decrease. Some people have argued that suffering might decrease through growing climate change because, I don't know, it would be more colder temperatures in the north, which might mean there's less animals there, etc. But there needs to be more research on this to understand what would the situation of wild animals be like. Would there be more disasters? Would there be more diseases? Would there be faster life histories? Would there be more parasites? We need to understand how the suffering of wild animals would change as climate change accelerates, and how would transformative AI, which uses up all these resources, silicon and mining, etc., how would that affect wild animals? Would there be fossil fuel cars? Would there be electric cars, etc.? So there's a lot of simulations to be done and a lot of exploration to be had. However, transformative AI could also assist a lot with wild animal research. It could be helpful in understanding the behavior of wild animals, and also, it could help us model welfare aggregations. There's a lot of uncertainty right now in understanding, oh, what is the welfare of this animal? What is the welfare of a bullfrog like? How do I know she's happy? How do I know she's sad? How do I add up different welfares of different species in a given ecosystem? So an AI might be useful in having these complex calculations. It might be helpful in modeling the ecosystemic changes, whether we are planning to rewild a given ecosystem to populate it with species. It might help us in better estimating what the welfare of animals is like in those ecosystems. And it might also help us with intervention design. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about the tractability of large-scale wild animal suffering reduction interventions. Like, people are scared that, oh, we try to do this, and this happens. However, even if we wanted to do this at the large scale, we don't have the bandwidth or the resources to make it happen. So AI might be useful in intervention design. And automation, of course, whether it's giving animals vaccination or, like, for example, large parts of Northern America and Europe are now free of rabies because of them dropping vaccine-laid biscuits, which are rabies vaccines basically, dropped from helicopters. So it is possible that instead of helicopters, we could do it much more efficiently with drones, which would make it possible for us to automate any forms of wild animal suffering interventions. And of course, monitoring. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty about what the situation of animals in the wild is like. We don't know, basically, and we need more data. There is already information present in other disciplines like ecology or zoology or, I don't know, like other related fields. So it might be possible that AI would allow us either through camera traps or sensors and other stuff like satellite imagery to make it more easy to monitor the situation of wild animals. A small example in this case, which is a lot of birds die during, in this windmill dominated areas. And so I think this is in Netherlands, I might be wrong, where there's this camera trap where it detects if there's an eagle flying close by, and it radiates out sonars, which leads to the birds being repelled away and not dying. However, there needs to be more work done to understand how transformative AI will affect wild animals and what should we focus on. Right now, there's 4 or 5 organizations focusing on wild animal welfare research or policy, etc. There's more coming up, which is great. But there needs to be more work in understanding what areas will be accelerated by transformative AI and what areas can we work on right now. So trying to prioritize or recalibrate our prioritization to work on this. And additionally, policy and outreach. There's a new organization that's coming up that's planning to focus on wild animal welfare policy in the UK. There needs to be more such work happening and more outreach in tandem with policy so that we are able to establish these norms within institutions where the interests or the well-being of wild animals is considered within policy and governments, etc. Quick question. For those of you who've seen this talk before, please don't answer it. But what do you think is happening here? I know you see a rat, but anything else? Close by. Close by. No. Do you see something odd about its back leg? Flying, thank you. Yes, that's right. So basically the rat is floating. Why do you think that's happening? It's in the space, exactly. So there are animals right now being sent into the space to experiment on them. There are shrimps being sent into the International Space Center. There were experiments done where they sent tardigrades. I don't know if you know tardigrades. They're these small, resilient animals. They were sent by, I think, an Israeli space craft or something onto Moon, where they tried to see if they would survive. Unfortunately, they didn't survive, but it's possible that they send more and more of these animals to test if they would survive on space. So there is this intervention called as terraforming, which is the practice of trying to start life on other planets. This is done by sending the seeds of animals or plants onto other planets. So what would this cause? This would make it sure that we send wild animals and ecosystems into other planets, and which would result in more and more wild animals. So there are a few papers done on like, how is this happening? So breathing life into Mars, maybe one day Elon Musk wakes up and he wants to send, I don't know, some animals into Mars or Moon. And you never know what could happen. And there's already work happening on this front. And there's also some papers on the ethics of directed panspermia. Panspermia is another name for terraforming, which is trying to spread life out into space, into celestial bodies. So essentially, this could be very risky from a wild animal suffering point of view, or a factory farming point of view, where we take in animals into other planets and we increase the scale of it. One might have thought that, maybe we increase factory farming only to the extent where we have land on Earth. But now it's possible that we take it to other celestial bodies and scale it up rapidly. So there's high expected value because the number of beings that will come to exist in space would be a lot. Right now, there's a window of opportunity. There's very few actors trying to invest into this and trying to take factory farming into space. So it's possible that we might have more leverage in trying to change the trajectory of this. I spoke with someone at another summit a few weeks ago who works on space governance. And he was telling me that it is quite easy to perhaps change the policies that exist right now in terms of taking animals into space. One could argue that it might be considered as a reputational risk. This is very weird. What are you talking about? There's factory farms here, and you're talking about like preventing animals from going into space. That might be so, but given that the window of opportunity is right and transformative AI is close by, it seems to be very high in expected value in terms of us working on this right now. Environmentalists have already started lobbying some of these space NGOs and space organizations in terms of how to take environment into space. Like, I think the Moon Agreement in 1970s, where they said that, no, we need to keep the moon pristine or something like that. So what can we do? Soft lobbying, which is we approach some of these NGOs. But again, if you're planning to do this, I think it might be more prudent to talk to people already working on this, get a better understanding of the landscape before we start sending emails to some of these space organizations. So it needs to be done very strategically. Instead of being controversial and very antagonistic, we can focus on more soft lobbying, influencing regulation. I've come to know that there is no one single regulation that controls or constrains other countries from sending life onto space, but there are some bodies within the United Nations and some influential countries like the US, UK, etc., that might be a good avenue for us to influence regulation of. And the third thing is promoting the meme of keeping space pristine. This might be also collaborative and with other environmentalists who prefer not interfering with other ecosystems. So we can promote the meme of keeping space pristine. What can you do? If you're interested in that, you can support organizations working on it. It's called Cosmic Futures for Space Governance, I think. And however, there's no other organization working on this, so you can maybe talk to people about starting organizations or other NGOs working on it. Focusing on AI, pursuing more research, and upskilling. So if you're interested in whatever I spoke about in terms of transformative AI, I think you can include these four parts of intervention into your career trajectory. If you're interested in learning more about this, we've published one article on wild animal suffering and the importance of the future, where we lay out some of the ethical arguments and considerations that might be useful. We plan to publish more research on this, by the way. And for those of you who are not aware of the organization that I'm part of, Animal Ethics, we take a long-termist approach. So we think about what might be best from the far future point of view for sentient beings. We focus on neglected approaches. Like, for example, we focus on changing social norms. So we focus on anti-speciesism advocacy, raising moral consideration about groups of animals that are usually overlooked, like wild animals or invertebrates. And yeah, like I mentioned, neglected animals or also future sentient beings, which people usually overlook. So if you're interested in supporting us, we would be very interested in collaborating with individuals who are interested in doing more research on what's the best way of changing social norms. What can animal ethics do? Are there ways in which we can leverage transformative AI to prevent worst cases of suffering? And so we work on future animals, wild animals, and simple minds, which includes invertebrates, insects, but also simple digital minds. So we plan to extend moral consideration to all sentient beings irrespective of their substrate. So we've also published some literature reviews on invertebrate sentience. So if you're interested in learning about that, I would highly recommend you check that out. So we focus on research, training. We used to focus on research and training, but since there have been other organizations that are more fit to do that, we have pivoted to focusing solely on outreach, and we focus more on that. So if you're interested in supporting our outreach work, I would be very happy to talk to you. And we also do international work, so we have translated our website into around 15 languages now. And so we would love to, spread out the outreach work globally. So if you're from a given country and want to support us, we'd be happy to collaborate. We are also trying to focus more on our work on China, given that there's, it's a very complicated space to navigate, but at the same time, we think there's a lot of potential in changing attitudes towards animals there. So we are also trying to do some advocacy there. Wider outreach. If you're interested in learning about wild animal suffering, and if some of the stuff that I spoke to you about wild animal suffering or consequentialism or something like that feels very alien, I would highly recommend you check out the video course that we have on our YouTube channel for animal ethics. We've also published one recently in Hindi to educate the Indian audience. How you can help us, please promote our resources. We think this, I personally, before I joined Animal Ethics, I was very surprised that people were not aware of the information at Animal Ethics. So please promote our resources. If you would like to support us by donation or volunteering or contributing in other ways, we would be very happy to collaborate. And as I said, we would like to reach out to more of global audience. So if you're interested in translating our work, creating videos about our resources in other languages, again, would be very happy to collaborate. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Aditya. That was like spot on time. So no work here needed. We're now heading to the Q&A session. We've got a couple of questions and we've got some time, so I'm going to be reading them first of them. That's what AI regulations would you advocate for to maximize the change of TAI AGI having correct incentives in terms of animal rights and welfare?
Great question. I would like to caveat before I share my suggestions by saying that I'm not an expert in terms of governance. I have some experience in the landscape. These are my opinions from limited experience. Wow. Okay. One, I think it might be useful to have, like I mentioned initially, having sentience within the constitution of AIs or within the safeguards, having anti-speciesism as one of the potential guardrails, like there is for anti-racism or other forms of bigotry or discrimination or prejudices. So that could be one. And two could be trying to, like, if you work on AI governance or if you have influence on AI governance in some of the influential countries, trying to ensure that the development of AI is more democratic, like has better epistemic ways of progressing. If it so happens that it's being ruled by a dictator who doesn't care about animals, then we would lose all levers of change. So it might be much more useful for us as animal advocates to lobby for more democratic ways of governing through transformative AI as opposed to not. And if you're interested in learning more about this, there have been some great EA forum posts on this. I think you can check out Sentient Futures, or you can check out Amplify Impact or Electric Sheep. But if you just go to the EA forum, the Effective Altruism forum, and type AI and animals, there have been some good. There's been some good exploration on that. Yeah. So and as I mentioned, for space governance as well, like there's a window of opportunity there. No one's investing in it right now. So perhaps coming up with regulations that that try to constrain how AI can be used to spread animals into space or other celestial systems. Yeah.
Thanks. So another question, can we as activists already start working on convincing generative AI chatbots to give answers which include more ethical approach for treatment of animals and spreading anti-speciesist ideas?
I think, so based on my conversation with someone from Google DeepMind, they said that it's a low-hanging fruit and that it could be done. But as I said, that I am not very aware of the pathway to it. They mentioned about talking to the AI safety teams at some of these labs. I think some folks in the animal advocacy movement are already exploring that. I think Constance has perhaps explored some stuff there. But that said, when we talk about the far future and transformative AI, I think that just getting LLM bots to be a little less speciesist might not count for a lot. It might be a minor thing. So I would like to, yeah, just highlight that. So that would be an interesting priority as well. But that said, I think there's many more areas that are more pressing. Yeah.
Approach me if you're interested in running a project on that.
Oh, great. Amazing. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, your name?
Alexa.
Alexa. Okay.
Okay, so next one, short one. Can the creation of sentient AI somehow be prevented?
Yes, that's a great question again. So I think it would be good to try to come up with a moratorium with countries or AI labs to prevent the creation of digital sentience. I think there's one thinker, Thomas Metzinger, who's been talking about a moratorium on digital sentience. And I think that would be great. But right now we have very little understanding of what sentience truly is. We don't know which theory of mind is the most robust. We don't know how it would come up in these AI systems. However, there's been some work being done by the NYU Mind Ethics Policy Program, and also there's this researcher, Aditya, who's talked about how reinforcement learning can be against the interests of sentient AI systems. So it's better for us to find other ways of developing AI that don't depend on reinforcement learning. But that said, I don't have a lot of information on the pathway of preventing digital sentience. I would encourage you to take a look at NYU, Ilios AI, and Thomas Metzinger's work, basically. Yeah.
Can I shamelessly self-promote? So the Sentient Futures run conferences and also a Slack workspace, which covers a lot of the long-termism and animals point, but also covers digital minds, and there's a lot of debate going on in the Slack channel at the moment. We also share resources in our newsletter, and I have nice business cards if anyone's interested and serious about any of that. Sorry.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, a little bit of self-promotion, never wrong. Next one. What kind of competitive advantage would AGI gain by caring about human and non-human animal suffering? And if there is no competitive advantage, why would AGI adopt this strategy?
That's a good question. So it is totally possible that an AGI doesn't share any values that we humans care about. It might be possible that it turns out to be a paperclip maximizer or something that just optimizes for something that it's gained as like its primary objective. So, like, there's been some work done into this multipolar world scenarios where, like, how would an AGI cooperate with humans? What would it gain from cooperating with humans? Right now, we have some leverage over it where we can say that, oh, only if you collaborate with us, we will give you more autonomy, etc. Or something like, we will give you more rights if you respect the rights of humans, or something like that. We could extend it to all sentient beings. If you respect the interests of all sentient beings, then we would give you more autonomy and more rights. Right now, we have the leverage where we can constrain the autonomy of AI systems through our AI safety measures, etc., which might be against the interests of an AGI. Again, this is very speculative, and I'm not an expert in this, so if you're interested in learning more, I think Lucius Caviola has been talking a bit about this, so you can check out his work. Yeah.
Okay. Now, given how challenging it already is to control and regulate how AI is being used in regards to ethical concerns like stealing intellectual property or environmental concerns, water usage, how do we motivate both the general public and regulators to care about animal rights on top of that?
That's a great question. Again, do we have to convince all of the general public to care about animals, or do we have to convince key stakeholders who are developing AGI to care about animals? So it's about identifying who these key stakeholders are, what are their incentives, what are their interests. So it's a bit about politics here and trying to understand how these systems work, and then trying to, see what power or what leverage do we have, and trying to use that to influence them. It could be something like, an AI cares about all sentient beings, or maybe like collaborating with other people who are also trying to get AI to care about some of their values and finding ways of, including that concern within AGI systems as well.
Okay, thanks. And another question is, has there been literature on the possibility of hybrids, biological creatures, including non-human animals, that are integrated with AI capabilities?
Yeah, I don't remember reading any such literature. Like the only resource I have in mind is Okja, the movie where there's a hybrid pig. But yeah, I think there's perhaps some movies or I don't know, a Black Mirror episode that has something like this, but I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. I think we can squeeze them in. First one, how do we train AI to put inherent value on farmed animals and separate it from the monetary value that is put on them in the current industrial farming system? What could be better weights to add to the equation so that better welfare options wouldn't just equal to most productive / profitable options?
Right. Yeah, so I think one, in understanding how prejudices change or the moral status of certain beings change in the society is a complex subject. We can take a look at history and try to look at, have there been instances where beings with a certain moral status have been elevated and there's been more moral consideration given to them in society where they're intrinsically valued as opposed to instrumentally. So I think Personally, I think there needs to be more attitude change, more anti-speciesist meme spreading, convincing people of rejecting the discrimination of non-human animals, because I'm not very sure if like welfareism or like just promoting high welfare products in itself will cause a significant change in attitudes. It might contribute, but perhaps a more direct way of approaching it might be to target speciesist attitudes and behaviors. So I think that would be one. But yeah, like I think another option might be that as AI systems gain more power, they might be in control of governance, in also advising all the most powerful players in the society. So it might be possible that if we convince the people who are, I don't know, responsible or involved in embedding certain values into AI to care about all sentient beings, it's possible that we could gain certain pathways which we didn't have before to change the status of animals in more efficient ways. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And the last one, as we wait for transformative AI and AGI within the next 5, 10, 20 years, in what ways has AI already impacted animal agriculture, factory farms, animals in science, etc.?
Sorry, could you please repeat that?
Yeah, we wait for the transformative AI and AGI, and in that way, in what ways has AI already impacted animal agriculture, factory farms, animals in science, etc.? So
that's a great question, and I don't think I can squeeze all that context into the few minutes that I have. It is significantly changing the landscape, whether it's in terms of factory farming, research, alternative protein. It's happening at a slower rate. If you're interested in learning more about this, then I would also like suggest a few courses. It'll probably also help animal advocates. So there's, like Sam mentioned, Sentient Futures. There's also Electric Sheep. We are also developing a course where people can create tools to kind of enable animal advocates to do better advocacy. There's also another course, Amplify for Impacts, where again, advocates can use or create tools to help animal advocates. But that said, there's a lot of work happening. I think there's another workshop that's being done by Damon and Jay tomorrow, where it's like an hour-and-a-half workshop where they talk about how AI is intersecting with different fields. So if you're interested, I would recommend going to that session to learn more.
Perfect, great. Thanks once again. Give a big round of applause for Aditya. Also coming from the public, thanks for talking about wild animals. So thanks again.
I would also like to give credit to Oscar Orta, who wasn't able to join us for this session. He's also supposed to give this talk with me, but he was unfortunately sick. So yeah, just giving him
thanks.
credit.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you joining us here in person and online. Please remember to rate this session in the Aventory app, and yeah, let's have a lunch break.
Thank you. Thank you.